Hi, everybody, and welcome to Tremco Live, where we're socially distant but technically connected. I'm Marcy Tyler, the Director of Building Science for Tremco, and I am once again joined by my co-host.
Hi, Marcy. I'm Paul Hugenboom. I'm the president of the Tremco Construction Products. Marcy, but you knew that.
I do.
Tremendous collection of companies and brands and products and systems, and of course, most of all, people.
Yes, of course. Most of all, people. So how are you, Paul?
I'm fantastic.
Very good, very good. Well, it's good to see you. Excited about kicking off this month of October. If you've been following us, September we focused on labor savings and had lots of great information and lots of contributors to that. So in the month of October, we're focusing on resiliency. So how resilient is your structure? How durable is your structure? We've got a lot of great guests that are industry colleagues of ours that'll be coming on and talking about just that. So definitely exciting for us to discuss just that resiliency of structure.
Yeah, by now in the year, you know, we're well into our storm season.
Yes.
And so resiliency, I think, remains top of mind.
Yes.
And we cross our fingers we can get through the next month or so and not have to be resilient.
Exactly, exactly. And I think, you know, in having these conversations, Paul, a lot of people are saying, you know, we needed to be resilient yesterday, right? But we're talking about it when it's relevant, right? So it's just kind of interesting to kind of.
That is one of the great challenges of resilience, right?
Yeah.
Is it's always obvious in hindsight.
Yes.
And it can be a challenge to communicate the need for it.
Yeah.
You know, when oh, I don't know, it's been a quiet couple of years.
Yes. Exactly. So. Yeah. So we definitely want to be able to get up ahead of it. So we're really excited about being able to bring all of that to all of you guys each and every Friday. We really appreciate being able to wind down with you as well. But I just want to throw it out there. If you have a specific topic that you're interested in sharing as it relates to resiliency or durability, a great case study, as always, you know, you can reach out to me. Today, though, we are pretty excited that we have a special treat. We are going to be bringing on here in a minute a guest that it's nothing new for this person in terms of understanding durability, understanding resiliency is certainly something that he deals with each and every day. So we're definitely gonna be excited about having him come on here in a minute. But of course, as always, we want to be able to share with you our opening information as it relates to Tremco CPG Live. And that October theme, once again, is resiliency. So without further ado, we will go ahead and invite our guests to come on right now. So welcome, Jason Wigboldy, to Tremco Live. We're very excited to have you as our guest today.
Thank you, Marcy and Paul, so much for inviting me to participate in the discussion. I really look forward to it, and as always, truly enjoy collaborations with Tremco. So thank you again.
Of course, you know, we're really excited. There's so much work that we've been able to do together, and so often that you know, I'm so excited to be able to have you on today with us. We certainly go back many years. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and your experience in the industry? That would be great.
Perfect. Yeah, so my name is Jason Wigboldy. I serve as president for TRUFAST Walls organization out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And historically, we were known as a different company, Rodenhouse Incorporated. I'll get into that in just a second. But our parent company is called Altenloh Brink & Co. out of Ennepetal, Germany. Coming up on our 200th year anniversary, believe it or not. We're at 198 years right now. And in America here, we're best recognized for the brands of TRUFAST, which serves the commercial roofing market for TRUFAST Roofing, and then TRUFAST Walls, which focuses on attachment solutions for walls, and then our SPAX brand of construction fasteners, primarily wood-to-wood type construction fasteners and hardware sold into the residential and light commercial market.
Great. Thanks for sharing all that with us. Once again, just so excited to have you on. I know we've got a variety of things we're going to share today as it relates to you and your experience, but we got to kick it off with your LinkedIn profile picture. What's going on here?
Well, the story, it's probably not quite as exciting as some might think, but it was a really cool opportunity. Going back about 6 or 7 years ago, the STAFTA conference, the Specialty Tools and Fasteners Distributors Association, it's a large association with about 2,000 members. We have an annual conference, and they, at that time, decided to have the Sharks onto that conference show floor, and they did a whole seminar and event as if it was the actual Shark Show, where beforehand manufacturers could submit products for them to evaluate, and then they interviewed live and in essence had a Shark Tank session in front of the large live audience. So we were unfortunately runners up with a fastening solution that we presented. We lost out to a cool gas can that somebody developed that I now see all over the country in every hardware store. But we were runners up and got the opportunity to meet with the Sharks, and it was a really cool experience. So I wish I could say it was actually on live television, but unfortunately, it's more of a trade show type event.
There's not an episode. There's not an episode for this, Jason, that we can watch.
Unfortunately, nothing that I'm aware of, but I'm pretty sure that's staffed on their website. I think they have some of the archived photos, so in video.
That's awesome. We'll have to check that out for sure and find you there. But thanks again for providing that information to us. I know I knew you back in the Rodenhouse days, and so we thought it would be appropriate to share that transition, as you mentioned, how it's gone from Rodenhouse to TRUFAST, and of course, all the different applications that you work with on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've been in business since about 1992, and up until January of this year, our division or brand was recognized as Rodenhouse Fastening Systems. So within the walls market, that name still resonates, and that's probably still more recognized, and we're working through that process. But in January of this year, after the acquisition of Rodenhouse Incorporated back in 2017, we started that transition to rebrand and consolidate under that larger national TRUFAST brand, recognizing that there's a roofing division and now a walls division that each focus on our own respective markets. So just a little bit of background on that.
That's perfect. And it's interesting because I knew the change happened when somebody sent me, they're like, you need to test these TRUFAST, fasteners. And I'm like, oh, these look really similar to the Rodenhouse ones. And that's how I figured it out. And obviously called you, and we started to talk about, and we continue to talk about how we're going to update a lot of the testing we've done with you to show more appropriately the TRUFAST name. So interesting, Jason, that you're on today. As we mentioned, we're talking about resiliency and durability. And I love to ask, Paul and I've had this conversation, as we look at our structures, if we think about every 100 square feet, how many times, how many fasteners, how many potential points of concern or holes are we looking at on a structure, right? And there's a lot. So clearly this conversation is worthwhile. And this picture in particular is very thought-provoking.
Yeah, in fact, Marcy, if you wouldn't mind going back a slide there, just to touch on that exact question. How many fasteners are we dealing with when you talk about wall assemblies? What we do as an organization is create attachment solutions, primarily mechanical attachments, screws and washers, but also dabble in some adhesives. But in essence, that lower half of the slide there represents a host of different assemblies, whether it's insulation attachment or lath attachment for stucco or stone veneer, brick anchor veneers. All of those have to be mechanically attached. And in the context of smart building design and building science, specifically the air barrier, continuity of those walls, we have to ask ourselves the questions: what are all those fasteners really doing to the performance of that air barrier? And we've been fortunate to collaborate with Tremco for many years to study just that. So we look at a host of different applications on a day-to-day basis, from rain screens to stucco to air barrier attachments, as well as mineral wool insulation attachments, and EIFS as well, not to discredit EIFS. All those require different attachment methods. Specifically, if you want to advance the slides one more time there, Marcy, what we did a few years ago, and I think this was such a cool story on stucco. Tremco invited us to participate in a large multi-company, multi-industry discipline approach to really understand what all the lath fasteners and the assemblies for different lath and stucco assemblies, what's actually happening from an air barrier perspective, from a moisture drainage perspective. And to me, this is a great example of what Tremco does very well, and that's collaborate with other industry leaders in their own respective categories. Rarely are you going to find a single manufacturer that makes every single part, piece, and component required for a wall, unlike commercial roofing, where all the parts and pieces can be available from one source and installed by one contractor. Wall assembly is different. You've got multiple subcontractors, multiple installers, and it's a matter of how do you collaborate with all of those, and what's really happening to the system performance when you've got really a lack of ownership in a way when it comes to true assembly. So just to touch on this particular project, Tremco again was very generous in inviting a host of different industry leaders respective in their niche applications, whether it's a fastener manufacturer or lath manufacturer, obviously air barriers from Tremco, and all these different components required to make robust stucco assemblies. This picture here is actually a small representation of the number of companies involved in this project, and it was headed up by Bill Cardo, which many in the Tremco family, of course, have known for many years, a good friend of ours. So, but in essence, what we did as a team was develop about a dozen unique assemblies. If you advance forward, I think a slide, Marcy, we can start to see what some of those assemblies start to look like. Where we looked at different parts, pieces, and components, whether it was air barriers, lath attachment with or without insulation, different fastening perspectives, different fastening patterns, and we made 12 unique assemblies that kind of provide a baseline understanding of really what's happening behind the scenes when we put these on the wall and see what happens from an air and moisture perspective. So, Marcy, you were involved in that project. I'm curious to kind of gain your perspective as well from the initial concept and bringing that to the market.
Yeah, and once again, a shout out to Bill Cardo, leading that up from our team's perspective and inviting all the partners in. But I know Paul, Jason, just so you know, Paul and I give tours there at our facility regularly, and the very first thing we say is welcome home. And we say welcome home because we want to happen just like it did with you and all those other partners. We want it to be a collaboration spot for everybody.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Jason, all this becomes a catalyst for people like, well, now that I can test anything, what would I test? And of course, the other thing we always like to share is it's not a bad way to start your job either, to test your assemblies before you go complete your structure and maybe bring your foreman in or your crews. And so yeah, Marcy says, welcome home. And then people are like, now what? Yeah,
exactly. And I know we talked about that collaboration, and it's so important that occurs. There is a lot of hands touching that wall, and anything we can do to get ahead of it in terms of understanding the nuances of fastening patterns or sequencing of installation and the connection of all your enclosure.
It's always interesting, Marcy, one or more of the wall assemblies, like once we sort of break from the formal presentation, people like immediately get up and go to like one or two.
Yeah.
And Jason, it always tells us either you've had a problem or you're worried about a problem, or but they gravitate, and some of these assemblies are still around.
Yep, exactly. And that's the best part of the hands-on, or what we're trying to accomplish virtually, is just showing people what they can do. And what we have done. And I don't know, not to put you on the spot, do you remember how many years ago we did this?
This was about 5 or 6 years ago, I want to say. Yeah, it's been a little while. So right around 5 years ago, if I had to guess. So, yep. Yeah, talking more about these unique assemblies and kind of showing some examples of the say ingenuity that collectively all these players brought to the table. When we start looking at all the necessary parts, pieces, and components of these stucco walls, we had some challenges to kind of figure out. On these particular pictures here, you can see we've recessed the windows into that wall to provide more of an adobe type look, where you've got a real thick mass masonry wall. And even a detail like that, where you've got a window flashing, you've got lath that wraps around, you've got the corner details. Obviously, you got to have a good quality flashing product like Tremco can provide. And there's those kind of details that we really wanted to kind of focus in on and provide on these dozen or so walls, all of these unique configurations. Again, just to get a kind of a baseline understanding what really happens to these assemblies when you penetrate through with all these fasteners. And again, I got to give Tremco a lot of credit for that. They've always been so proactive in just asking difficult questions, and then not just talking about it, but just going to the test lab and build something and let's test it. Let's actually see what happens and not just theorize. So hats off to Tremco for doing that and leading the charge. So. In this particular assembly, by the way, you can see that we've included a layer of continuous insulation. And that's something that obviously is no longer a buzzword within the industry. It's kind of here to stay, and rightfully so. It does a great job of providing a continuous blanket of insulation. But in the context of stucco, again, that was fairly new at the time. 5 years ago, it wasn't very common to put a hard coat stucco over continuous insulation. And again, those questions were in everyone's minds. What's going to happen with all those fastener penetrations when it's going through a layer of foam, be it XPS or mineral wool, and what's it do to the air barrier? And then from a structural perspective, again, cantilevering the weight of the stucco outboard of the insulation was another question in the industry's mind. So all of these things were kind of coming together as an industry and multiple players to study all of this in this particular project. So it was very cool. So.
We love to talk about this one because of that, right? Imagining how people were building and now they had to change the way they were building, and especially with something like stucco, you know, imagine, if you will, what you're seeing here is that addition of that insulation, right? So it's not a new conversation anymore, but it continues to be a conversation because a lot of times your specifications say continuous. And they might not give you exactly the route to go.
And I remember, Marcy, you shared with me that when the continuous insulation started to become more heavily code or specified or enforced, generated a lot of concern in the stucco industry about how that was all going to work.
Yeah. So we were so excited to be a part of this. And of course, being able to have all the industry partners there, building multiple walls, you know, the space to have that dialogue was such a key part of it. And, you know, we did work with, you know, a testing agency too, like we like to do. So it's that collaboration spot. And I always like to say it enhances all that we do when we come all together.
Absolutely, yeah. One thing on this slide here, just to point out that, again, the team really went the extra mile to not only test the assemblies with all of the guts of the wall, if you will, but you'll notice in the lower left picture, we ran through air and water testing first all the way up to the lath layer, so prior to the stucco or the base coat, and then ran that through all the cycles, and then ran it through again after it dried and a layer of stucco was applied in the upper left picture. And it was interesting as a team to kind of compare the data, if you will, side by side. And we collectively learned a lot by testing both of those configurations and truly understanding what air barriers were resilient and simply put, what might not be as resilient. And it was interesting, again, the Tremco air barriers really performed incredibly well in both of those scenarios. But it was interesting to see on the fully assembled wall with that layer of stucco, as that moisture penetrated through the stucco and it got kind of trapped or stuck behind, you could create head pressure behind that layer of stucco in the face of the air barrier. So it really comes down to having a robust air barrier to ensure that you're not going to be creating moisture penetration issues behind that layer of stucco. That was kind of one of the summaries that we had from the team. So.
Absolutely, and I think that goes back, and I think, Paul, you and I've said this too, it's always interesting for us to say, we think it's important to have your air barrier and have it be robust for these reasons, but when you start to show it, right, and see it and see the reasons why, which is exactly why we love having, you know, especially this study and other studies that we're working on. So as you're watching today, everybody, there might be something you're thinking about.
And also, Marcy, you've educated me on, there's so many opinions.
Yes.
And the nice thing about this facility is you can say, hey, we can have all the opinions we want. Let's go see what the data shows.
Let's go see what it shows us. And then, you know, that ability of working all together, you know, showing the testing itself. You know, once again, you know, if people are able to come here, I know, Jason, you and I are going to talk offline on some of the next stage of testing we're going to do. But you know what? Tell us what you're looking at. Tell us what your design configurations are. This is a great picture showing that recessed window and how we detailed that. It shows that water, right? We're going to get about 8 inches per hour of a good film of water during this test. And then the best part, busting it all apart to see what's going on behind it.
That's right, yeah. And for those in the audience that are not familiar with how these walls are tested, on the last slide, you'll see that there's actually a negative pressure differential that's trying to basically suck the water through any penetrations of that wall. So it's not just simply a static sprinkler that's set up, it's trying to draw at different pressures and different cycles that water through the wall assembly. And on some of the wall assemblies, again, it was in a way kind of no surprise on some of those weaker style air barriers, building building paper, we had a lot of leaks. And so the picture on the right side, you can actually see we tried to demolish that wall and do a surgical removal of the different layers, trying to track down where did the water and moisture come in. And going back to what I mentioned earlier, where if you don't provide a really robust air barrier, as well as a drainage path for that water when it gets trapped behind the layer of that stucco in the face of the air barrier, or the building wrap in this case, you run the risk of creating head pressure without drainage, and it's going to migrate through that wall. So robust air barriers like Tremco provides, coupled with good drainage behind stucco, whether it's insulated or not, that's really key to keeping moisture from migrating through your wall assembly. That's in a nutshell kind of what we learned in this exercise.
And it's exciting to see this data and to prove that out. And now we're looking at other things too in addition to this, which we're going to get into. But thanks for providing that summary, right? That importance of understanding your complexity, the opportunity, so that we're not overlooking those details in a bad way, right? We want all eyes on it as much as possible. Understanding that true gasketing effect, is it occurring, isn't it occurring? We love that ability of that robust air barrier to help out. And then of course, drainage, there's different materials that offer drainage. And if you look at that information, they're either going to give you 50%, 40%, 8%, 90%. There's a percentage of their drainability that is interesting too. So lots of great things we learned here in this study, but also if you want to read more about it, we wanted to make sure everyone was aware that it was in Wall and Ceilings magazine. And you can just reach out to Jason or myself or Bill Cardo. We can provide you with additional videos and documentation that demonstrates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think this article should be on the Walls and Ceilings website for those who don't subscribe to that magazine, and kind of provides a walkthrough again of what we tested, how we collaborated, and just kind of a testament to that team approach for sure. So thanks again for the invite to participate in that study. We learned a lot as a company, and in a way, it's kind of a good segue into our new product portfolio of what we'll call self-sealing fasteners in a way. On the, I think you maybe have a visual on the next slide that starts to kind of show what we've done since that test 5 years ago in evaluating our fasteners and all the data that we collected in that test, and trying to think about how can we improve fastener sealability. And we've got a handful of solutions that have all been developed since that 5-year period of time. As you see on the screen here, a handful of different applications, including masonry veneer cavity wall. In the upper left, our GripTech tube seal fastener, which is for insulation or lath attachment through a layer of insulation and through an air barrier, and still able to preserve the air barrier performance. And then some specific solutions for different types of insulation attachment, like the MW plate in the lower left. But in essence, just over the last year or two, we've launched this new portfolio of self-sealing fasteners, again, all in thanks to the data and the information that we were able to collect as a collaborative team approach about 5 years ago with Tremco. So we can take a dive into some of those unique fasteners if you like. So.
Yeah. Let's take a look at them. And I think what's interesting is, we're talking about air barrier performance. Now you're blindly fastening, right, Paul? You're going through insulation, and that's always a concern for people. So once again, choosing the right fastener is going to be a big deal. Making sure that we're detailing appropriately with the appropriate air barrier. All of those things are going to make a difference. Paul, I think you and I were talking about this earlier about specifications.
Yes, and I was curious about couple things. One, what do you see in specifications? And two, what would you like to see?
That's a great question. What we see is everything under the sun. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how complex some architects might get, or how incredibly lack of details others take. I would say as a trend overall, we're starting to see more and more systemization where an architect is starting to realize the importance of these relatively seemingly insignificant details like a fastener. I think people are starting to understand that when you add that layer of continuous insulation, you're adding another layer, another set of fasteners, and cantilevering the weight outboard of that insulation to where you got to think a little bit differently. And to what Marcy said earlier on the blind fastener penetration, that's really key. you don't see with your own eyes as you're drilling through that air barrier when there's a layer of insulation between. And so you don't really know what's happening to that screw penetration. In the case of missing a stud, let's say, and you got to move that fastener over, you got to have kind of a system or methodology in place to seal that up. I think architects and specifiers are starting to understand that better over the last 10 years of continuous insulation utilization. Ultimately what we like to see is specifications of products that have been tested as an assembly. It's one thing for us as a fastener company to say that, oh, these fasteners are self-sealing, but ultimately we got to look down at the actual assembly. What air barriers were used? What insulations were used? Because the insulation itself is going to bear different results, whether it's mineral wool, a fibrous insulation versus an XPS type insulation that can help provide kind of a gasketing effect. But ultimately, I would challenge architects and engineers to really look at what has actually been tested in any given assembly, be it brick veneer cavity walls, lath or stucco or rain screen, whatever it is. Don't look at just parts, pieces, and components. Think of it through more of a holistic systems approach.
Absolutely, and I think that's why we have the capability that we do, and we want that. We want to be able to address that. And the good news, I think, Paul, for the industry is even our installers, because of all this education and awareness that the industry is providing, they're asking that question. So if all of a sudden the fastener is being changed, our air barrier installers are going, hey, wait a minute, that's not the same fastener that we tested or evaluated or approved. So it's definitely, we're getting there. We still have a lot of work to do. So we're excited about the opportunity and the innovation that you guys are providing. And that's part of why we like that robust air barrier. We want a little bit of a forgiveness factor just in case. We want that ability for that membrane behind the insulation to give you a level of protection.
Absolutely. And you know, the GripTech tube seal, what you're showing right now is one specific example of what we kind of learned from that stucco research 5 years ago, where the different types of insulations can have different gasketing effect on the face of the air barrier. And again, there were multiple types of air barriers used, some Tremco and other kind of just generic type assemblies. And first and foremost, the Tremco air barriers performed incredibly well. But in the case of building wraps or papers, things that are more of, let's say, mechanically attached, we realize that there's really a big risk of causing leaks when a fastener, especially in the steel stud and gypsum, starts to drill through that steel. It's going to take a second for that drill tip to drill the steel, which means that screw auger is kind of pulling gypsum and tearing up the air barrier. And so in this case here, what we're doing is adding a urethane tube associated with the thickness of the insulation, and the tube will puncture through the insulation, but then compress on the surface of the air barrier and do a good job of self-sealing both of the air barrier penetration as well as on the underside of that washer. So the GripTech tube seal is a perfect solution for use to attach either continuous insulation with our thermogrip washer or with a grip plate washer that you saw in the stucco testing to attach lath and still be able to achieve a seal of the blind penetration at the air barrier layer behind the insulation.
Well, I know we've got a couple other pictures here, so obviously there's going to be differences depending on what your insulation, what type of facade you have, and that's obviously where Jason will be a great resource to provide those specifics, you know, and just as he mentioned, so depending on what you're using, whether it's mineral wool or rigid insulation, there's going to be solutions that exist out there. So definitely reach out to Jason so you can understand the great technology that exists from TRUFAST and all this innovative approach. But I wanted to get to this information. You know, Paul, I don't know if you spied it. We're talking about air leakage, we're talking about water resistance, but obviously continuous insulation, we want to make sure we're addressing thermal bridging as well. So now they've got some great innovation here with their fasteners and some studies that were done by RDH as it address just that.
Yeah, yep. Air and water, of course, is a very important concern, perhaps the greatest concern from a wall design perspective. But as we add these layers of continuous insulation, how do you ensure or gain full performance of the insulation that the customer is ultimately paying for? What kind of reduction do you see in different types of cladding attachment solutions? RDH headed up a really interesting study where they looked at different methods of attaching cladding This screen here just shows a kind of a snapshot of the things that they reviewed, all the way from just simple long length screws through insulation, relatively small diameter screws, which means less thermal bridging, all the way to very, very poor insulators like Z-girds and everything in between. And you can kind of see in this report that they looked at not only the overall thermal efficiency, but also the constructability and the cost, two very important factors. You can design a very robust wall that has zero thermal bridging, but ultimately is it constructible and is it going to fit the budget? So this is a publicly available report, and one that we like to reference as kind of where we draw inspiration on our new brick anchor, which is a polycarbonate design to reduce or eliminate thermal bridging through the brick anchors, which are tightly spaced and fairly substantial thickness typically, that create a significant reduction in overall thermal efficiency. As you see in the bottom left there, perhaps as much as 40 to 90% efficiency is all that's achieved, depending on the style of brick anchor that's selected. So what we look forward to, I understand that Tremco is in the final stages of a new thermal chamber. And we look forward to that collaboration to take it beyond just air and water, and now also start to look at thermal performance of these types of cladding solutions. So we look forward to doing more work with Tremco here, hopefully in the short future when that's up and running. So
absolutely, that's exactly where we want to head. So we're excited. So if you want to see that RDH Tech Bulletin, you can go ahead and find it on their website. But we're definitely going to get there with the testing that we're going to do in addition. So we've done the ASTM E2357, we've done the ASTM E331 up to 25 PSF, which is, if you know, according to ASTM E331, once you have a facade installed, you're supposed to go to 6.24. So we went 4 times as high as what's typically required. We did it with our EXOARC 430, our EXOARC 110AT. You can see the configurations, the thickness of the insulation, the EXOARC 130, the EXOARC 230. These are the innovative things we love the opportunity to be able to do with Jason, and I know we're going to be able to do the next phase of this, which would be taking it into the thermal chamber, where we can not only, we'll do the air, we'll do the water, but we can also do that thermal resistance in real time according to the climatic conditions of various regions. So that takes it from that guarded hot box to a true thermal environmental chamber that'll really be so exciting to be able to do. I know that we're kind of breezing through these configurations, but we are coming out with the documents that support all of this great testing, all of these different types of fasteners. And I think, Jason, you might have said we accomplished what, over 60 different configurations, I think, Paul? Was that right?
Between the 4 air barriers, 3 different types of insulation, and about 4 or 5 unique types of fasteners combined together, there was well over 60 unique combinations on this particular test here that was done a few years ago. So again, just a great testament to the collaborations with Tremco. And in this particular case here, we're able to get that third-party witness with the test report. And again, to be able to do that all in your facility now, including thermal, is just so cool. And we really appreciate the opportunities to collaborate with Tremco moving forward. So.
Absolutely. And once again, if anyone wants to know about any more of this, they can reach out to Jason Wigboldy or myself, and we'll provide you with that actual documentation. So Jason, we're so excited. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to that next phase of testing that we're going to do with you. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it was finally, I shared when we made introductions this morning, we've seen Jason so often in that our core video in the test wall. So he's famous.
He is famous. You're famous.
I don't know if I'd say that, but I appreciate that, and I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to continue collaborations. And I mean, the organization Tremco is fantastic, and the people at Tremco are just genuine people. We truly love working with your team, and hats off to you for building a great team. So from the bottom of our hearts at ABC and TRUFAST Walls, thanks for the opportunity to come on here and talk about fasteners and air barriers and how we work together. So thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Jason. And I'll be in touch soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you. As always, if you're interested in joining the conversation with Paul and I, all you need to do is reach out to me, Marcy Tyler, mtyler@tremcoinc.com. So Paul, pretty exciting kickoff here for our month of resiliency. Loved having Jason on talking about fastener sealability. It's a topic we all talk about.
It sounds boring until you do this, and it's like, holy mackerel. Like, there's a lot going on, especially every time you say how many penetrations you think you're dealing with. You're like,
yeah.
well, it's a lot.
Exactly. So once again, if you have a challenge or a question or want to share, that's what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to address what is that concern or issue you have. Let's get together. Let's provide you that collaboration point so we can go out there and solve it.
All right, Marcy, is that a wrap?
That's a wrap. So thanks for joining us, and stay tuned for the entire month of October, where we talk about just that resiliency and durability of our structures.
See you next week. Be safe.
Thanks.